Good evening. I'm George Phillies, and we are doing an interview tonight with candidates for our national party's chair. I invited everyone who was running, and I am delighted to say that Mark Rutherford is here to be interviewed. So Mark, in general, where do you see the national chair going? What do you see as your mission, your parameters, where you want to go, what you should be doing?
Right. I believe the national chair is a leader, and a leader is a person who leads the whole LNC. You're going to have disparate people on the LNC, and you're going to have to work with all of them. What you have to do, and George, you've worked with other people and you know this, that you have to have all different types of viewpoints and you have to work with them. You have to call them, you have to tell them why you believe in things, you have to listen to them. Sometimes you change your beliefs on how things should proceed because of what you hear. But you don't do it at the last minute. You don't do it at the meeting. You just don't announce what you're doing. You have to show a leader. You have to help build consensus, which is not a bad word, because all consensus is finding out where everybody really is, where they agree, and where they can move the Libertarian Party forward. I'm a big person, George, about the Libertarian Party is a political party. And as a political party, what you do is you elect libertarians, and you work to do that, and you work to get them appointed to office. And everybody who's here at this convention, I would be happy to see them elected as a libertarian. I'd be happy to see them appointed as a libertarian. And the National Party has to do that. It has to have a culture of training, of working with people so that we do the best things that we can do to get libertarians elected to office. And how do you define a libertarian? There's many ways to do it. But I love the world's smallest political quiz. That's the best way I like to define it. And anybody who scores in the libertarian quadrant to me is the type of person that our conventions, that our grassroots should be looking at running for office. And here's a wonderful thing that I see about the Advocates for Self-Government quiz and people who score in the libertarian quadrant. There are, of course, exceptions to this, but way more, almost every time, what happens is that people who score lower on the libertarian quadrant, you talk to them and in about 4 or 5 years, they're running for office, they're working as a libertarian, and guess what? They're scoring 190, 90, 100, 100, and 100. The more they're around us, the more that they understand the libertarian philosophy, the more they do it, and we have them as supporters and people working hard for the Libertarian Party in the meanwhile. That is what I believe in. The National Party should be working on that, should have a culture of electing libertarians and getting them appointed.
All right, that was pretty good.
Very good. Well, having said that, there are all sorts of things that a national party really does, many of which are actually sort of equally important. It's often said that money is the lifeblood of politics.
Yes.
And there are two parts of that, two or three parts of that for a national chair, and one is, of course, going out to speak directly to really big donors, of which we have a few, and another, which is equally important, is how we organize to bring money into the national party. What are your thoughts on that?
I've got some very definite thoughts on that. There's many ways to do development, to do fundraising. But one thing, by talking to people that I know that have what many of us would consider to be a lot of money, is that why don't you give me a Libertarian Party? You're very libertarian oriented. And what they say is not a philosophical disagreement. What they often say is that it's people aren't, we don't have the right people in the right places. We need to have round pegs and round holes. But more importantly, that throughout our officers, throughout our affiliates, throughout our national office, we have to have the best people that we can put there who know how to execute and get things done. People will give money if they think that you can execute what it is that you want to have done and what needs to be done. As a national chair, if you look at my website, markrutherford.org, I talk about a way to reorganize the national office. If you look at how I'm reorganizing it, what it basically does is eventually it flattens out the people, it gets them more important roles, but it actually is more grassroots oriented. It gets more people down in the field working with affiliates, not telling affiliates what to do, but it's the old, if you teach somebody to fish, they know how to fish. And a lot of our affiliates don't know how to do that. A lot of our candidates don't know how to do that. We can tell them ways that have worked, and then they can decide what does work or doesn't work. But that's what you need to do. When you do that, when you have that organization, then the people with the big money go, my gosh, you're going to do something. You're going to get elected, and guess what? You're going to do what I want to see done. I want to see less government. I want to see better government when the few places where you have government, and I'm going to give you money to do that. It takes a lot of work, but it's very important, and that's what I think you need to do to get the big donor money, which is what you need to do to compete.
All right.
Very good. Having said that, the other half of this is we have many members who have much more time than they have extra money. Of course, we do have some members who can easily do the exercise working for the party by writing checks.
Right.
What role do you see for volunteers in the operation of the national as opposed to state parties?
It's very hard to run the volunteers to the national organization. National has a big scope. It can do branding well. It can do marketing well. One thing it can do, it can collect volunteer names and pass it down to the affiliates and grassroots. But you just don't do that. And we've done that for so many years. George, what you have to do is you pass it down, but you also have to have training. How to deal with volunteers, how to make them effective, how to use them so that that they do some good. And I do lots of things with law, with other organizations, and I've gone through volunteer training and how to work with volunteers in many different organizations. And there's good ways to do that. You start small. You give them a small project. If they like it, you give them a little bigger one, and then a little bigger one. That's what you do. And that's what we have to do. That's what the national office can do, is help the affiliates train people on how to use volunteers, and also to pass it down when we get that information. But I think that from the standpoint of what's the best place to get the best result from volunteers, you've got to enable the grassroots to do it and to use them effectively.
We do have grassroots parties. There are a whole range of activities of parties of different levels of success, and one can certainly point at Indiana as a successful party in many ways.
And the reason I say thank you as state chair there for 7 years.
I know. And we also have state parties that are much less active, and then sort of towards the bottom we have places where there's essentially no organization. In addition to that, historically, we've never tried to organize, for example, at least as far as I know, in places like Puerto Rico or Guam. These are American citizens. If they move to California or Massachusetts, they can vote immediately. What perspectives do you have on strengthening our state and such not organizations in different places?
Well, I think that's very, very important. And where you have no organization, the National Party may be the best place to have people who go to get it organized. Doesn't mean we go there and run it permanently. What it means is we've got people who can look for people in these states, and their job should be to go to, let's go West Dakota. I'll make up a state.
West Dakota.
West Dakota. They go to West Dakota, and there's nobody there. But they go there, and actually the fraternity system does this. They send out field agents, and they go to a college, and they interview people and say, hey, we'd like to put our fraternity there. And they find people who fit with the values of the fraternity, and they spend time, and they organize it, and they help run the meetings. And they get things done, and they find the good leaders, and they get them elected as officers. And then after a few months, it's like, okay, you're now chartered. You're on your own, but we'll be there to help you, and we'll give you support, but you're kind of on your own to running things. The National Party can be very good and effective about doing that, and that's what we should be doing more about that. We should send people to Guam. We should get it organized. We should have our paid staff on the streets doing that. And you get the people who know how to do that. You get people who know how to listen to the radio and TV and the newspapers and the Craigslist, et cetera, to find out where those people are, get them together, get it organized. I don't like going to an area and doing stuff without getting by strong affiliate, it's relative. An affiliate's strong enough to survive on its own. You have to have that first, and then good things come from that. That's the key thing, and we need to do more of it.
Well, part of that, if we want to have people in A or B or C, is we have to have people. We have to have members. Historically, there have been people who believe that we ought to spend large amounts of money simply on recruiting people and assuming that all the rest would follow from that. We've also had people who say that membership in fair part and membership retention will follow from good work, so that if we are succeeding, people will join us. And if people are not joining us, there's a message as to how successful we are or are not. And there's some very different perspectives here, and I'm not saying any of them are true or false. What is your take on National Party membership and what might happen in order for it to change in a favorable way?
Okay. Membership bothers a lot of people. And I'm not talking about libertarians. I'm talking about the voters altogether. It has its values. It has its thing that works. But I prefer terms like supporters. I measure supporters. To me, the person, I'll give you an example of the church. The top lay person is probably a volunteer. spends a lot of times in the church. They're very valuable. They're a supporter to me. But also a supporter is the person that once a year takes the pot roast to the Sunday dinner at church. They're all valuable, they all have different roles, and they're all supporters. You need to measure yourself more by supporters, how much support you have. I'll give you an example of Indiana because I know Indiana. Indiana has about 330, 340 members, but there are thousands of people every year who work on libertarian campaigns. You approach them about membership, they may say no. Doesn't mean membership bad, it means membership's different, it's not right for them. I want the whole global picture. I want all of them together. I want all these people working, and I don't care what you call it. And I want to grow us in that way. I want more and more people supporting us. It's sometimes hard to measure that metric, and that's a thing that we need to figure out how to do, in my opinion. But that's what I'd like to do. Now, you talk about different methods to it. My response to that is you need to do all of them. And what we sometimes have done is we've just focused on one at the exclusion of the other. They're all symbiotic together. You've got to do that together, and you've got to have an organization strong enough that takes all the pieces and works it together. Because one piece works, the other piece works, and then it all works.
Very good. Having said groups and affinities, if we look at the other political parties around the country, the Democrats or the Republicans, they're surrounded by special interest affinity groups. Now, the NRA is not actually the National Republican Association,
Right.
and the NARAL is not actually the National Anti-Republican Action League. Those groups are at least somewhat independent of their parties, but you can also find special interest groups which appear to be just as legitimate until you notice that they're headquartered inside their party headquarters.
Correct.
What is your perspective on affinity groups and the possibility of encouraging libertarian affinity groups, groups like, outright libertarians or the Pink Pistols, for example?
You have to have it all. You have to have those groups. And if you don't have those groups, a national political party, and those of us who are at the convention right now know there's some disagreement on some things. But the nice thing about an affinity group is that you've narrowed down the interest group. So you have agreement, like the outright libertarians have an agreement on what they're about. They may split on things such as bylaw amendment number 5. But they have a common goal, and they can be very successful at spreading the libertarian message. They can be very successful at fundraising to support libertarian issues or candidates. And, as very important to me, they can help identify those people in the community and those people that they serve and their interest group who should be good candidates or be a good appointed office holders. And so it works for all of us. The more different affinity groups we have, the better we are, in my opinion. And I think they're great. I like to see more libertarian PACs. I like to see more libertarian interest groups. It makes us very much stronger.
Very good. One of the things that the National Party spends a great deal of time and money on is getting our presidential candidate on the ballot around the country. Now, on one hand, being prudent, we try to do this as thriftily as possible. On the other hand, we can point in 2008 at unfortunate things that happened while the hurricane was not under our control, of
Correct.
course, where if there had been more investment, we might have done better. And I guess the question is, what is your perspective on the importance of presidential ballot access, and what is your perspective on how little can we do this for, and what do we need to spend in order to be sure it happens?
Well, the answer, I'm going to answer your last question first, is I don't know what is needed to spend on it. And that is my problem. We've been doing it for 40 years, yet we don't have laid out in an easy to identify documents or schedules or whatever in our history what it generally takes. We do too much last minute reactions. Oh my gosh, we need money for such and such state. And that is the next problem that I have with the ballot access and how we do it here. And it's not the way I do things. It's not the way you do things in business. It's not the way you do things in law. It's not the way things you do as a professor, et cetera, et cetera. You have to plan ahead and have a good plan and do it and put it together. And it's very important that we do that we have standards that are identifiable. And a lot of people know that I voted no on some ballot access requests, and I'm going to tell you the reason why. The reason why is I didn't get a compelling case that I thought they'd be successful and they'd get it done. And that's not, or they asked for more than they needed, et cetera, et cetera. But as I'm doing that, and what I'm concerned about, George, is that there are other states that nailed it just nailed it, their presentation. And I'm going, my gosh, we have no standards. This state may have just gotten lucky by hitting the things that are important to me and others. This state may have gotten unlucky. We need to do a better job of that so that states know what is expected of them, what the national party can do. We need to be better about that. We need to be a sophisticated organization, have those laid out. Most of us do that very well in our professional lives, in our business lives, in our lives with churches and other organizations. We have to do that here, and it needs to be done. We haven't for 40 years, in my opinion.
Okay. Well, you brought up the point that you had, Mark, that you had some votes and maybe everyone didn't agree with you.
Right.
And maybe I should give you a few moments. You've been on the LNC to
Right.
think about things you voted for where people were curious, why did he vote that way?
Oh.
Or whatever. And if you would want to speak up on anything so the audience hears your thoughts on these matters. And if you don't want to, I understand, because after all, you have been on the record in the LNC meetings is how you were thinking.
Right, right. That's a tough one because I think there's been about what I call 35 or 36 major votes. Probably most of them made at least somebody unhappy. But that's what you have to do as a leader on the LNC, as the chair. You look at it and you do what you think is the best thing. And that's all you can do. And sometimes you have to do it even though you know you're going to get attacked for it, and that's fine. But I will bring up one thing, because I know a lot of people are talking about it, and I'll bring it up because I'm not afraid to address it. That's the floor fees. Here's my position on the floor fees. I don't think that the bylaws prohibit them. What I am upset about is that on this convention, and I've told some people about this, is that for months, and for many months, the Convention Oversight Committee of the LNC was saying we need a chairman appointed for it. It didn't happen until 4 months beforehand. Ruth Bennett, she's very competent. That's only 4 months to do that, and done in my mind at the last minute. And when you do that, you don't plan ahead. You don't plan on how you're going to deal with floor fees. Anybody who's been in this party for a long time knows that floor fees are always contentious. So you have to deal with that. You have to plan with it. I come from a state, Indiana, that doesn't charge floor fees. I can tell you why it doesn't do that for many reasons. One reason is banned by our bylaws. That's fine. That was a decision that was made, and everybody's happy with that. But there's other reasons why they don't do that, and they don't have problems with that. And that is because I wasn't able to this year because I forgot. I'm very embarrassed by it. But usually I put my business card in the program. They get $50 from me. They get $50 from other people. That pays the cost of the convention. I do think people need to have some skin in the game, and that can be very difficult on that. And I do think that there are some people who take advantage of any organization, no matter what it is. But I do think that it's very, very important that we look at getting more corporate sponsorship. If you know the FEC laws on conventions, there's a lot we can do that we can't do otherwise from corporations even. And the limits are not what are usually out there. To get sponsorships, etc. I do think you need to have something as an entry fee. My fear of floor fees is that you do get to a point where it's prohibitive and it's too expensive. It shouldn't be a barrier. But I also understand people say you have to have some skin in the game. But if you plan a convention better, and Indiana does it, Indiana does, I don't know if they make a scat of money on it, but I haven't heard they've lost money or if they have very little in a long time. And yet it's open to everybody.
That's very good too. Okay, let us consider challenges facing our national party and where we might go. And some of these are challenges because libertarians are of different mind, and some are challenges because there are lures to draw libertarians off center. One challenge, and this is certainly not anyone in particular's fault, if we look around our national meeting and we ask, okay, how many people are here? How many of them are women? How many of them are African Americans? How many of them, if we listen hard, seem to have accents? And where are we reaching out? I mean, you can say, well, maybe we should be reaching out to all Americans, but if you see people who aren't showing up, maybe there's a message here. Do you have any thoughts on that? That's a hard problem, and I'm happy to agree that it's hard.
It is a hard problem. I think there's a simple solution to it. We have to reach beyond our comfort zones. both of us have been around long enough. You may not remember this, but there's a Rasmussen poll that was done for the Libertarian Party about 11, 12 years ago. And the amazing thing is that about African American males, as a percentage, this is probably about 2001 that this quiz was taken, a higher percentage of African American males were kind of strident libertarians than white American males. What does that tell you? I know Indiana has a couple of African American delegates, and there's a couple others out there, but we certainly don't have those percentages represented by our delegates. And I don't think it's because we're excluding them at conventions. It's because I don't think we're reaching out to these communities that have natural libertarian tendencies. But what you have to do is you have to get out of your comfort zone. To do that, for example, in the African American community in Indianapolis and other major cities, Atlanta, New York, Buffalo, etc., is you have, what are the big centers there? The churches are big. You go there. If you go to churches and you start talking to the African American churches and trying to meet people, you can get people who are libertarian. They go, oh my gosh, I've been looking for you. You're the political philosophy. I didn't know you existed. You do it by organized clubs, etc. But you have to go out outside your community to do that. Not your community, but your comfort zone. It's very, very doable. But that's what we have to do. We have to get better at doing that, and we aren't.
One of the questions that comes up, if we look at the way the United States is going, as you can point at, we have people who are wiretapping the phones, reading the emails. It's far more extensive and thorough than anything that Stalinist Russia could do pre-computer.
Right.
We have the notion that the NDAA people can be interned without trial. We now have the Attorney General and the President saying they can order the assassination of American citizens on American soil. And even if you allow that the current occupants of office are better of heart than you would worry about that, you are in a certain sense looking at a turnkey kit for turning the United States into a dictatorship. And the question is, what can our party do to reach out to people and point out, we don't have to argue whether the Democrats and the Republicans are close or not because of some of the things they've now set up. Do you see opportunities there?
Well, I see tremendous opportunities out there. A lot of people are beginning to be upset by that. And the people I see getting the most upset are the middle of this political spectrum. It's not the Democrats, it's not the Republicans, it's the people in the middle. And they are there and they are very, very upset. We need to go out and reach to them. The more of those people we get voting for us, the more likely we'll get people elected or appointed to office. And I'm an appointed office holder in Indiana. Governor Daniels appointed me to the Indiana Public Defender Commission. I'm chairman. He appointed me as a libertarian because by state law he could only appoint so many Republicans. He had to go to another political party. He decided he'd rather have a libertarian on it than a Democrat, and I'm more than pleased that he asked me to do that. That was wonderful. And what I have learned from that, I knew it, I kind of felt it, it's amazing the impact that I have on this little slice of state government and how I've changed things just by being the chairman, by being on it. The more people you get like that, the more that you can stop it. We can scream all we want, and sometimes screaming works, but sometimes it doesn't. The best way to stop that is by getting our people there who will stop that stuff cold. They won't allow it. It takes time, and the way we're doing it is very, very tough, but it's far better than violent means. We're a peaceful group, and the way we're doing it, I'm very proud of it. We're trying to do it by peaceful methods and to stop this stuff.
Historically, we have had there have been periods when we've published trifolds and other periods when we have not. Under modern conditions, there seem to be more and more Americans who are not active in speaking English as their political language. They may be adequately fluent in it for business purposes, but if they really want to talk about politics or philosophy, they prefer to talk one language or another, not English. Do you see options for the National Party doing trifolds again, or do you think we have better investments? Do you see options for outreach outside of the English language, or do you think we have other paths we ought to pursue first?
I'm not so sure the national office is the best place to do brochures, that type of thing. I'm not 100% one way or the other. What I do think is that our candidates are the best people to put out this material. And I think our candidates should be really looking at their opportunities. I think a lot of our candidates miss opportunities. I'll use Minneapolis, for example. They've got a regional group of Cambodians. I forget what the Hmong up there. I mean, if the candidates are running, there's a lot of Hmong in their district, they better be doing their brochures. They have an English one, and they better have one in the language the Hmong speak. If you're in some parts of Indianapolis, which I know very, very well, I got to tell you, you better have brochures in English and Spanish. And it's fine, it's great. And you should do that to do the outreach. And actually, when it comes to the national office doing this, maybe you can have forms or templates on how to do things, but the best periodicals I've ever seen in the Libertarian Party came from the candidates who were smart, good, used lots of pictures, lots of nice, easy phrases that people understood. And if you wanted to have more detail, you have this nice little link. For more information, go to markrutherford.org. I could talk about all the stuff I have on there, bore you to death. But if you're interested and fascinating, you go there and you're going to appreciate having that more detail. But that's, I think the best stuff comes from the local level and the candidates.
Okay, another little harder question. Looking at the future, what do you see yourself doing to focus the LNC on external issues that we would like to consider, as opposed to the sort of internal things that have happened if we look back, say, a decade ago? What do you see, how do you see effective leadership encouraging people to focus on substantive issues?
Sometimes it's as simple as saying at the meeting, you're in the weeds. And what I mean in the weeds, you're at the low level. You can't see over the weeds and the grass. The board has to be at a higher level. The board's got to be at the 30,000 feet level and dealing with the broad picture. You don't talk on the board level, and libertarians tend to do this. I know it's a natural tendency, and quite frankly, I have to fight this myself sometimes. You don't argue about how many number 2 pencils you buy for the desk. The board's job is to decide what office you're at. Somebody else is given the power to decide the number 2 pencils. We should be deciding the broader picture on how we best use national resources, how we do things like branding and marketing to help our candidates do better things, how we do training, and there's many different ways to do it. You can promote PACs or whatever they're doing training. You have to focus on that level, and you don't get into the nitty-gritty. What does a chair do as a leader? And I do it in many other organizations. I've done it in Indiana. Sometimes you just pick up the phone and you say, "Sir, you're in the weeds. You're down too far level. You agree with me? Let's go rising up." That's not really that important, and that's what you have to do. But you're not mean about it either. You're not accusatory. You joke, etc., and you make your point, and most people go, "Yeah, you're right," now that you talk about it. And then you have a very effective talk about how we do the broad thing, how we make the National Party better, how we do things that do help the grassroots, the affiliates, etc.
You brought up an issue. You used the word building. And there are a series of different perspectives on this. Some are, we can buy a building, and in the long run we have an asset. And in addition to having an asset, we are saving money in the long run. You can also say we have a building, and this lot, if you have any building, however magnificent or cheap or whatever, to some extent it locks in future options one way or the other.
Right.
And what's your take on that?
Buildings are fine. There are donors who like to give for buildings. I think you have to have safe parameters. I do not think that unless you take the organizations that have the abilities, funds, foundations, etc., can do with this. Very typical commercial loans for an organization like ours is that you're basically paying off the mortgage for 5 years, then you have a balloon payment where you owe a lot of money. You cannot strap the Libertarian Party. It's unfair to future LNCs to strap the future LNC with a huge balloon payment. It's all right if it's enough that maybe can be met with cash flow or you have big reserves or whatever, but we're not that level yet. I think we can get there, but you don't do that. I don't think you do that. And I'm glad we haven't done that, although I've been very scared that we were going to do that. When it comes to buildings, they're fine. They do strap you down. They can be investments. Again, I think it's more important to do buildings when you're at the point where you're more financially secure to do that, where you can afford to do that. The other thing, I just point blank have to say this about buildings, is this is my philosophy. I've worked well with the people in Indiana on it. I think a lot of people in Indiana and a few other states have embraced this quite a bit. And that is, we look at, is what we're doing going to help elect libertarians to office or get them appointed to office? And oftentimes, when I say, do you build a building or buy a building, I'm not sure how that does that. There are times when maybe they're very appropriate, especially when some given to you, or a very generous donor goes, hey, I like buildings, I'm going to give you a bunch of money for it, and you go, not a priority yet, but it is now, thank you. That you can do. But unless you have that opportunity, I'm a little reticent on buildings.
Okay, so we have all of these opportunities and options. Since you have been on the LNC, one of the things you can always ask yourself, is there something we are doing that we could do either much better or the same thing for considerably less money to free up resources for other objectives? Is there anything in particular as chair you would like to look at early on? I don't mean quite as grandiose as my plan for the first 100 days, but...
Right. No, you have to look at that with a fine-tooth comb. You have to look at where your money's going. I know a lot of people who have money look at our budgets that are public and they go, oh my gosh, you're not spending a lot of money to outreach, to going out and marketing, etc. It's very, very top-heavy on things that's administrative costs. I think I want to try to reverse that. That'll take some time and take some fundraising to do that, because I do believe we're understaffed in a lot of regards for what we need to do. But one thing that I think is very, very important is that we need to have a more global approach, and I'm going to give you ballot access as that. To me, ballot access is more than just getting petitioners out there to get on the ballot. It also should be helping to build strong affiliates so that you don't need ballot access anymore because they can maintain it once they get it and get the votes they need. It also means maybe some lobbying efforts. So I know Michigan did that. They were very successful maybe 10 years ago. They had terrible ballot access, and we're in a situation where they were able to take advantage of it, where they got relatively easy ballot access, and because of lobbying and working with legislators. Nebraska just got modified their ballot access to be much, much better through lobbying efforts. You have to have those things, because when you succeed at that, and you don't have to keep putting money into ballot access, you then can put it into other areas. So I think that's an area that we need to look in and having a more global approach. There are other things that are out there, of course, when you look at the budget. But to me, that's one area that maybe not short term, you have immediate savings, but you do long term.
Well, we have gone over a large number of different topics. I suspect that if I thought for a bit, I would realize I've forgotten something obvious.
Yes.
But since we have the huge off-camera studio audience who has mostly been very polite and very quiet, I wonder if there's members of the studio audience who wish to raise their hand, and I will point at them, and you get 2 or 3 words, not 2 or 3 hours of question, 2 or 3 words to suggest a topic. Are there people who wish to suggest a topic that we haven't hit up on yet? Let me repeat the question, since I'm not sure how the mics pick that up. The question is, how do you deal with self-dealing and conflicts of interest? We have a small number of libertarians. We have a lot of different things going on, like your Atlas PAC,
Right.
My Liberty for America magazine. We could go down a huge list of these. How do you propose we deal with this sort of question?
I think transparency is it. You need to be as public as possible and ask everybody to be as public as possible. You can have lots of rules about doing it, but basically it's about getting a culture where everybody just discloses these things, where you tell people what they're doing. One thing as a lawyer that I know, and as a lawyer I'm good at this because I have to be on my client's behalf sometimes, is you can make everything look like an ethical conflict. What matters is, does it really have an effect? And is it to the point where it's always will have an effect and you have no choice but to ban it? Or is it just, if we know about it, then we can make an evaluation whether it's a problem or not. There's a lot of stuff that could be self-dealing that's out there, but if it's transparent, everybody can make their decision about it. If they don't like it, they can say it. If they do like it, they can say it's fine, it's not a problem.
Okay, other questions. Let me phrase the question as, how do we deal with factionalism on the LNC How do we deal with people who talk off camera and then when they show up on camera have already decided on a script and votes and such not, or at least leave that impression? How do we deal with the sorts of issues that sometimes become divisive if handled poorly?
The only way to effectively do that is videotape everybody on the LNC 24 hours a day. But you can't do that. So what you do, George, and I have some problems with the LNC discuss list, and that is when you have a group of people who can make decisions on something that's like that, I'm happier if it's public. I don't write on it unless there's anything on it that I don't care that gets disclosed. I know supposedly it's private, but that's just my philosophy. You can't stop individual people talking to each other, nor should you discourage that. They need to do that. You sometimes get better decisions. But when you're to the point where you're deciding what should be done, where it starts taking on online the vestiges of a board meeting that's normally open, then that needs to be open, and it needs to be done that way. I'm not that happy with the LNC discuss list and how it's used. That's my primary example. Never have been.
The question was, we have a national convention. It is traditionally met in a hotel venue. The point that can be made is that for lots of things, such as electronics, copying, hotels tend to be relatively expensive sometimes. And the question is whether there could be some interest in alternative types of venue as opposed to this hotel or that hotel for the national convention.
Lots of ways to do conventions, and I'm not opposed to being innovative to trying to do that. I know a little bit about PorcFest, not as much as probably I would like to know about it. I've talked to a few people about that. I'm always looking for good ideas on how to do that. The whole idea is not to drive everybody bankrupt, but have a nice facility where you can get the work done and the job done. If there's a better way to do it, maybe we should do that. I'm a member of several professional groups that they don't have annual conventions. They do everything by mail. There are reasons not to do it, reasons to do it, but they made the decisions to do that. That's the least expensive way to decide who should be officers and who shouldn't be officers. Again, I'm not saying that we should do that or not, but there's lots of examples out there about how you can do it and how you can get what you need to get done.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other questions? Question was, working with other alternative political parties, third parties, on questions such as ballot access, which affect all of us equally.
I have no problems with that. They are our competitors in some regards, but when you have commonality with people, sometimes you can get things done. One of the more fun things I've done as a libertarian was several years ago, they're expanding it into interstate highway in southern Indiana. And it was very fun that the Green Party and Libertarian Party, we had common ground. We had totally different reasons for getting there, but what our common ground was, we thought the highway was an environmental disaster and it should be stopped and there's better alternatives. Mind you, how we got there didn't matter, but we were there and we worked together to try to stop it. Weren't successful, but it was fun and we made some very good points and probably it helped some people out on looking at things differently.
We have been going on for some time. We've talked about various different topics which the next national chair, whoever he is, will have to deal with. Do you have any last closing thoughts you'd like to give us? You've certainly given us enough already.
Yeah, I think this is a great time to be a libertarian. I'm very proud about the Libertarian Party. There's lots of us doing things. Some of us do it one way, some do it a different way. We've got to be accepting of all different ways to approach things. When it comes to the LNC, no matter what you do, you're going to have different types of people there with different approaches. And the most important thing is you need a chair with the experience, like I have, with lots of nonprofits, businesses, and political organizations in leading disparate people when it comes to how your approach is into finding some common ground on how you move forward. And I like to end it by saying, sometimes the chair doesn't get what the chair wants. But the chair sees that the board has made a decision that moves things a little bit forward, and you help them implement it. I don't always get what I want on it, but whenever a board decides they want to do something, I've got two choices. Do my darndest to get it implemented, or quit. You very rarely are you ever put in a position to quit. Most of the time, if you think about it, you go, all right, maybe not the best decision, but I'm going to help them implement it and make it the best possible one. That's what you do as a chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, George. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Good question. Thank you. All right. Very good.